Alright, this video is going to be about how to factor a trinomial when the leading coefficient is 1, meaning there is nothing in front of x squared, or you can factor everything out of the whole trinomial and you're left with a 1 in front of the x squared group. I want to go over the steps first and then we will try a couple examples. Before I go over every single step, I want you to know that factoring a trinomial means taking a polynomial that has 3 terms and writing it in terms of its factors, and the factors, instead of being a trinomial, will become a binomial. It is the opposite of foiling, and if you cannot take a polynomial and write it into its factors, then we call the trinomial prime. Alright, so now with the first step, factor out the greatest common factor from each term of the trinomial. So if each term has a multiple of 2, you would factor that out. If each term had an extra x on it, you would factor that extra x out. Okay. After you have the greatest common factor factored out from your trinomial, you can move on to step 2. Okay, so step 2 says if the x squared term in the trinomial is 1, look for 2 numbers that multiply to get the c term, which is our last term here, and we'll add to get to the b term, which is the constant that is on x. Alright, so this is how I like to think of it. You want to find 2 things that multiply to equal the c term and will add to get to the b term. Okay, so that is what you're looking for. Now there's some tricks and hints that will help you get to this point, so I'm going to write those down for you. The first way to look at this is if in my quadratic equation here, my c term right here, right there, is positive, then both numbers will have to be whatever the sign of b is, because a negative times a negative is a positive, and a positive times a positive is positive. So that is the only way you could multiply to get a positive number. Okay, if the c term is negative, so our last term is a negative number, that means you have to have 2 opposite signs. And the bigger factor, the bigger of the 2 numbers, will have the same sign as the b term. Now after you figure out what the 2 numbers are that go into your factor, then you will do step 3. Alright, so then we will just write the numbers into their factors. So let's say that this was my first factor, n1, and n2 was my second number of factor. We will just go and write x plus the first factor, x plus the second factor. Okay, and if your number is a negative, instead of a plus, you would just write a minus. So let's try a couple examples and see how it goes. So the first example is x squared plus 6x plus 8. We want to first look for a common factor, because I have a 1 in front of my x squared and then no x on the last term. There is no greatest common factor to pull out. So then the second thing we need to do is take a look at my last term, which is 8 here. We want to find 2 things that multiply to get to 8, and we'll add to get to that b term, which is the 6. It's always multiply the last term, add to get the middle term. Alright, so the factors of 8 are 1 and 8. Those do not add to get to 6. Or 2 and 4. Well, what's 2 plus 4? 2 plus 4 is 6. So if I went 2 and 4, 2 times 4 is positive 8, and then 2 plus 4 is positive 6. So we have found our two numbers. What we will do is put them into the factors. So we have, my variable is x, so I'm going to go x plus 2, x plus 4. And it really does not matter which order you put the factors into. That would be your final answer. So example 2 here is x squared minus 4x minus 96. This one as well does not have a greatest common factor that you can pull out. So we're going to take a look at this 96 and the 4. So we want to find two numbers that multiply to equal negative 96, and we'll add to get to negative 4. So this is a little bit harder thinking of the factors of 96. 1 and 96 will obviously not add to get to 4. That's a little far-fetched. So they're going to be two numbers that are a little bit closer together. Some other factors of 96, the one I can think of is 12 and 8, which, that one happens to work. So we have 12 times 8. Now the only problem here is that 12 times 8 is positive 96 and we need negative 96. So one of these two factors has to be negative. To get to negative 4 where we add them, 12 minus 8 is 4. So the 12 is what will have to be negative, because negative 12 plus 8 will be negative 4. So on both of those, we have negative 12 and positive 8 as the two numbers that go in our factors. So if we go to factor that, then we have x minus 12, x plus 8. And that would be our final factored form. Notice that we started out with three numbers, x squared, a 4x, and a 96, and then we took them down to two numbers within each factor. Okay. Alright, example 3. Notice that I have a number in front of my x squared. So according to that, we can't use the process we've been using. However, if you can factor that number out from all of the other numbers in the trinomial, then you should still be able to factor the trinomial. Okay, so let's look. We have a factor of 2 here, a factor of 2 here, and a factor of 2 here. So I'm going to pull that out, and I'll end up with x squared plus 5x, whoops, that's pretty sloppy, minus 14. Alright, and then we have 5 and 14 now. We're going to carry this 2 through our problem. But before I do, let's think of the factors that multiply to get to 14. And we'll add, that would be a negative 14. That negative's pretty important. And we'll add to equal positive 5. So with 14, you have 1 and 14, or you have 2 and 7. Okay, now do either one of those add to get to 5? Now 2 plus 7 is not 5. 2 plus 7 is 9. But one of them needs to be negative. So let's see here. If I go 2 times 7, that is for sure 14. And I need a positive 5, so if I go 2 plus 5, that is not. But I need a negative 14 and a positive 5. Sorry, I made a little mistake here. That should be a 7. If I have the 2 be negative, then I end up with a positive 5 and a negative 14. So those would be our factors. Here we would have the 2 that needs to carry through, and we have x minus 2 x plus 7. All right, so that final factored form. All right, so that is it for example 3. Sorry I was having a little weird thing happening there, but we've got our final answer now. All right, let's look at one last example for these type of problems. All right, so I have 3x squared y minus 27xy plus 5y. Actually, something happened. Hold on. So it's supposed to be 54y there at the end. So let's look at for the value that we can factor out of here. We have a 3 and a y as a factor on each of those. So I'm going to factor out 3y. And then what we end up with is x squared minus 9x plus 18. All right, so the 3y will carry with us, but let's think about the things that two numbers that will multiply to get to 18 and add to equal -9. So they have to be the same sign because our multiples is positive. So what two numbers multiply to 18 and add to get to 9? It is 6 and 3. Now we need a -9 though, so that means both the numbers must be negative. So -6 plus -3. So if we go and write our factors there, hold on. So the 3y will be out in front, and we will have x minus 6, x minus 3. And we are then done with the problem.